What's up, everybody? It's Kelsee Briana J, and in today's video I am ranking my Anastasia Beverly Hills palettes from my least favorite to my most favorite. And I just want to make sure to let you all know that even though this is a ranking video from my least to most favorite, I still have love for all of my Anastasia Beverly Hills palettes, and this was actually really hard for me to do. And so what I like to do when I rank my palettes, I decide if hypothetically, which I don't even like to think about it, if I lost my entire Anastasia Beverly Hills eyeshadow collection today, you know, knock on wood, but if I did, in what order would I repurchase my palettes? And so by using this method, as painful as it is for me to even think about it, this is what helps me rank my palettes. Let's go ahead and jump into it. I'm going to go from my least favorite to my most favorite. And so I have 10 Anastasia Beverly Hills palettes. And so coming in the 10th place is Miss Third Ward. No, I'm just kidding. That's Beyonce. But I'm going to rank my Anastasia Beverly Hills x Alyssa Edwards palette in the 10th place. And that is because I feel like these eyeshadows are just a bit more powdery in comparison to my other Anastasia Beverly Hills eyeshadows. And so I have this palette on my eyes now. If you all did not catch my previous video, I will have it linked below as well as in this video for you all to check out. But I did a review on this palette, and this one is the newest addition to Anastasia Beverly Hills' line. So as a result of the eyeshadows being a little bit powdery, I just feel like the blendability of this eyeshadow palette just isn't really on par with the others that I have. But the color story of this palette is so dope. But if the majority of the eyeshadows in this palette were the same formulation as my other Anastasia palettes, baby, this might be number one because I think this color story is just so beautiful. I love it. So coming in at number 9 is a throwback vintage Anastasia Beverly Hills palette. This one is the Anastasia Beverly Hills x Tamana palette, and this is one of the first collaborative palettes that I actually saw, and I've kept this all throughout the years. But I think that this palette still is beautiful, but the palette definitely is dated. You guys know Anastasia doesn't even make palettes like this anymore, but the color story for its time was cutting edge. But now it's like, girl, everybody has like a neutrally type palette with the pop of blue. You was ahead of your time, girl. You was ahead of your time. But this palette is still really pretty, like I said, but you know, just looking at it against the others, it looks just a little bit dated, but I still can appreciate it for what it is. And I think that Anastasia is trailblazers. They knew what was up before everybody else did. Okay, so number 8, which I think is going to surprise a lot of people, but the Modern Renaissance palette. And I know a lot of people are like, oh, Modern Renaissance, that's holy grail. Oh my gosh, how could you rank it so low? Okay, calm down. The Modern Renaissance palette is beautiful, but I did get this palette maybe, what, 5 years ago at this point. And so I think this palette was innovative for its time, but as time has progressed, I don't really reach for this palette like ever. I can't even remember the last time I used this palette. I think that I'm going to do a review rewind pretty soon, and I'm going to do a fresh look with this palette. But back when this palette was launched, there was not a lot of warm toned, reddish toned eyeshadows. And this palette really broke the makeup industry because it really disrupted the industry. After the launch of this palette, every single brand had to have a warm eyeshadow palette. And so I recognize this palette for being a trailblazer. However, since other companies have done this palette so much, and since things have evolved, I feel like there are other warm toned eyeshadow palettes on the market that are giving me a little bit more oomph, that are a little bit more complementary to my complexion, because I feel like a lot of these colors are just a little bit duller, which is fine on a lot of people's complexions. But since I have that goldeny sun goddess, you know, sun-kissed complexion, very golden, very yellow, some of these colors look a little muddy on me. But I think that it's still beautiful. It's still a great palette. It's just not outranking my other palettes that I have by Anastasia. So before I show you the next palette, hear me out. I'm going to rank my Subculture palette number 7. And yes, I like my Subculture palette better than my Modern Renaissance palette. Shh. I like this palette better. I think this palette is prettier. I think that the color story of this palette is just a little bit more modernized. It's giving me something a little bit different, and this may be because I really got tired of the warm toned eyeshadows, and so I feel like this palette is just giving me a fresh take on a color story. But I just feel like these eyeshadows are a little bit more vivid. I think these eyeshadows are a little bit more unique, and I like the way these eyeshadows look more on my complexion. But I know almost everybody on the internet was complaining about the Subculture palette, and I know, like, I understand your complaints. It is a more powdery formulation. If you blend the colors together too hard, you're gonna get a muddy look. But this palette, if used correctly, Baby, you can get one hell of a look with this palette. It's gorgeous. Number 6 is the Riviera palette, and I think this palette is so fun. I feel like it was a breath of fresh air when Anastasia released it. It was something that I totally was not expecting because I've said it a few times on my channel. When I see this packaging, I swear to you, the last thing that I am expecting in this palette are these colors. I know so many of you all have left me comments like, no, Kelsey, if you ever go to the Riviera, you'll see the colors. They have paintings and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. But I'm just saying, based on what I know and what I've seen, these colors are unexpected. But I'm not mad at it. I think the eyeshadows in here are very fun. I think these eyeshadows are formulated very well. And I love the bright looks that I'm able to do. And even if I am not in the mood to do a completely bright eye look, which a lot of the times I'm not, you can absolutely use this palette for a pop of color palette and just make your eye look a little bit more enlivened. So I love this palette. I feel like it is so dope. Number 5 is the Anastasia Beverly Hills X Norvina palette. And if you all don't know who Norvina is the daughter of Anastasia Beverly Hills, and I also believe she is the creative director for Anastasia Beverly Hills, so a lot of the products that launch are her brainchild. It was only natural that she was going to design her own palette because, honey, if my mama was the queen of the beauty industry, I'm making all the palettes and one of them is gonna be mine with my face and my name, okay? So this is what she came up with, and this palette just reminds me of the 70s flower children, just very free, flowy, groovy, whatever. The colors are so whimsical, they're so flirty and romantic, and I love this palette. I have not used it as much as I thought I was going to, but the color story is just unique. I don't have anything else like this palette in my collection. I know a lot of the colors are a little bit lighter. Some people who have deeper complexions were concerned with this palette not being able to work. But if you really look at the person that they were collaborating with, which was Norvina, she's very fair in complexion, and so this palette fits her. So if it fits everybody else, cool. But if not, you can absolutely reach outside of this palette to use deeper colors to be able to use this palette in conjunction with it, because I feel like the colors are worth it, especially these shimmers up here. These shimmers are some of the best formulated shimmers that I've ever seen Anastasia do, and I love this palette. So number 4, this palette, in my opinion, is super underrated. I feel like when people talk about Anastasia Beverly Hills' palettes, they rarely talk about this one, but this palette brought that hot fire. And that palette is the Prism palette. So this one was a holiday launch palette, but when you look at it, again, I feel like this color story was ahead of its time. I feel like if Anastasia launched this palette right here, right now, 2019, June, July, August, September, or say it's coming out for the fall 2019, it would be a much bigger hit because people are ready to play with color. And I feel like when she launched this palette, people were still on the neutral kick. They weren't quite ready to venture into this much color because this has a bright green in it. It has the blues, the jewel tones in it, and I just feel like people were scared of it. But now, I think this is super on trend. The brand knows trends before it becomes a trend, and that is a reoccurring pattern that I'm seeing now that I'm going back through my palettes, because I feel like this palette would be a smash hit if launched right now, because this is the color story that everybody else is doing, but this is a color story that Anastasia already been did. Not already did, they been did it. Been done that, been done that, been there, done that. It's already discontinued. So now we are down to our top 3 palettes. So coming in 3rd place is the Sultry palette. If I were ranking the palettes based on the packaging, I think this one would come in as number 1 because this palette is sexy. That is the best way that I can describe this packaging, and just the overall vibe of the packaging just makes you just want to say ooh and touch it, because this packaging just is alluring. And then when you oh, there goes that brush. And then when you open up the palette, you are met with this beautiful color story. This color story is so chic, it is so sleek, and it is so sexy. Perfect for me, and I like it. If I want to do a smoky eye, I will reach for this palette still to this day. Top 2. This next palette is my most used Anastasia palette. I use this palette all the time. This is the only palette that I currently have that has holes in it, and that's because I constantly, and I do mean constantly, use it, and I am battling myself not to get another one just because I have abused this palette and it looks dirty. The Soft Glam palette. This is my perfect palette. When I want to do an everyday look, this is what I go for. And whenever I do wedding makeup for my bridesmaids and my brides, this is my go-to palette. When I want to do a soft look, but I still want it to be impactful, bam, it has my transition colors, it has my deepening colors, it has my lid colors, it has my highlight colors, and these colors really complement my complexion. I feel like this palette was made for those of us who have caramel skin. I'm just saying. I know everybody else can wear it, but I just feel like this palette was made for me to love it. I use this palette at least once a week. It's one of my favorite palettes in my collection overall. So I think Anastasia did a phenomenal job with this palette. If she ever discontinued it, I know I would have to go get 4 more just because I need to always have this in my collection. But honestly, this palette is irreplaceable in my opinion. I don't use any of my other palettes in my collection nearly as much as I use this one. This one is the GOAT. Love it. Alright guys, so we have reached the #1 slot, and I know a lot of you all already know what it is, but some of you all may not, because you may not have been around in the makeup industry when this gem of a palette was launched. This palette was made by none other than makeup artist extraordinaire Mario. And I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name. I think it's Dedivanik. Don't give me the lying. But this palette is, let me close my eyes for a second and take a moment of silence for it. This palette is perfection. This is definitely top 10 of my favorite makeup collaborations ever. And I do mean ever. The only reason I don't use this palette more is because I don't want to run out of it. I don't want to hit pan on my eyeshadows, and I don't want to ever not have a shade from this palette. So I use it very sparingly. It's been a while since I've used it, but this palette is perfect. And I mean perfect. You can do so many different looks with this palette, and you look at it and you're like, well, it just looks neutral. It looks like whatever. But it transforms when you put it on your eyelids. But if they make this palette permanent, this would be the only palette that I would need to travel with. You can take maybe one more palette if you wanted to add some color to it. But if you are wanting to do a sophisticated eye look, a sexy eye look, an eye look for a night out on the town, an eye look for a business meeting, then this palette has the shades to transform your look. I love the formulation of these eyeshadows. I feel like these are the best eyeshadows that Anastasia has ever done. And I don't feel like any of my other palettes eyeshadows feel like this. I don't know what they did to these eyeshadows, but I want them to do more. And I love all of my other palettes. I've purchased all but 2 of these palettes after this one, and they have not done anything like that again. That palette is pure fire. I need Anastasia to go back in the lab, get whatever they had cooking with Mario, and do it again. I just need it again. If you're not able to do the palette again, maybe just come out with those shades individually. Or maybe just keep this palette always and forever. Let's just bring it back. Because I know a lot of you all were not able to get your hands on it because this was launched, like I said, a few years ago. And I feel like a lot of people slept on it, and that was a mistake because this palette is everything. So I can go on and on and on about that palette, but I love all of my Anastasia palettes. Anastasia is one of my absolute favorite brands, especially for eyeshadow palettes, because as you guys saw, they are trailblazers in the industry. They are always coming out with something before you know that you needed it. And then when you have it, you're glad that you do. Let me know how you rank your Anastasia Beverly Hills palettes down in the comment section. I look forward to reading you all's order. So I will talk to you all in my very next video, which will be super soon. Smooches. Bye.